Have you lived your life by being the quote unquote good girl, doing all the right things, checking off all the right boxes, and really seeking that approval? Well, today's guest is going to talk all about her transition from the good girl to the right girl for herself. I'm Clara Capano, and I am here, your host today for Women Winning Their Way, where we're going to talk about living your authentic life and creating success all on your terms. So help me welcome to the stage. We have Sharon Tasman. Sharon, thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome. And Clara, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm really excited to share my story with your listeners.
Yes, well, we need to hear it because as a recovering good girl myself, there are so many things that it really is bringing to light. So I'm excited to be able to share some of your wisdom and your thoughts. Before we get started, this show is all about creating success. And we know that that definition changes over time. So before we even get started, let's go back in time to when you were a little girl. When you were younger, before you achieved a lot of your accolades and made your way in the business world, when you were younger, what did you think success was going to look like for you?
For me, so my mother was a computer programmer, my older brother's a computer programmer, and it was sort of the family thing. So to me, I expected that I would become a computer programmer, get married, have kids, the very traditional route. In high school, I was sort of the parents' dream child. I didn't smoke. I didn't do drugs. I didn't cut class. I didn't even cut class on senior cut day, right? I was the perfect definition of the good girl.
Hmm. Absolutely. And so many of us do that. Before we go any further, tell us a little bit, though, about yourself and what you're focused on doing right now.
So I have been a business technology and life sciences lawyer for 30 years. It's really hard to say 30 years because that kind of gives people an inkling of my age. And in my head, I'm still about 35. I wish I
Mhm.
was, not quite. There are days when I wake up when I realize I'm not 35. But now for the last 10 years, I've had my own law firm where I have some people work for me. I did the big law for 15 years. I did big corporate.
Mhm.
And I missed having the connection that you have when you're in a smaller firm. When I started my big law firm, I was only in an office of 50, even though globally they had 400. At the time I left, they had 47 offices and 2,500 attorneys around the world. And all of the clients at that point were giant clients that could afford big law rates. And I
Wow.
really missed the smaller clients where I could have a personal connection with the client, but also more importantly, where I could make a difference because I knew the client so well, I could often head things off at the pass. So by
Mm.
having my own practice, which is smaller, I don't have the giant fancy office building. I'm able to, I was able to charge rates that smaller, meaning, uh, you know, $10,000 to actually about 50 to $100 million is
Mhm.
smaller. Clients could afford. And for the last 4 years, as a woman in business, I know, and I know you know, how hard it is to be a woman in business. We just have to be, to borrow the expression, better, stronger, faster. We have to
Mhm.
be more nimble. We have to fight against society's expectations. We have to fight against internalized expectations, in fact, of being the good girl. Because
Mhm.
when you are in business, sometimes you have to put your foot down. You have to take positions that aren't, quote, nice. And I want to help women fight against that. So for the last 4 years, yes, I still work for technology and life sciences and biotech clients that are more on the corporate side. But I've
Mhm.
really been focused on helping solo and small business startups, especially for women and the members of the BIPOC community. I'm trying to help women realize that legal shouldn't be scary. It doesn't have to be insanely expensive. That
Mhm.
quality contracts and protecting yourself isn't only for big corporations. And more importantly, when you're small, contracts are actually your best friend when you're in business, whether and understanding your rights, whether you are in business for yourself or actually working in a corporation for somebody else. It's important to know your rights all the time.
Mhm.
So that's why I have been really focusing for the last 4 years on women and members of the BIPOC community and smaller firms, smaller companies where I can really make a difference because doing it right from the beginning is so much more cost effective and it gives you so much more protection than having to go back later and fix it. Yes, we can go back and fix many things, not everything, but many things, but doing it right from the beginning because when you're small or solo, you can't afford the risk that
It
a
is.
big company can.
Fantastic. Well, again, I love what you're doing about, making it more attainable, affordable, but also again less scary because when we are out there creating our success and we're doing it our way, we need someone out there to make sure that we're taking care of our interests. So let's
Absolutely.
Yeah, so let's talk about this whole thing being the good girl. Tell me a little bit about, how that started for you and why you fell into that role. What were some of the things that it did for
So I think growing up, I came from a family where education was an expectation. My mother will tell you that she deliberately brainwashed both my brother and I. It was always when you grow up and go to college, when you grow up and go to college. So I was on that path from the beginning. And while it was never stated you were allowed to get A's, it just it just felt like that was the expectation. My mother started programming in 1950 when women did not do this. My mother was a math major. My mother ran an installation at Bell Labs. So achieving in the computer and tech world was just sort of ingrained and thrust upon me. And that was my plan. I took all the advanced classes I could in high school. I applied and got into engineering school. My brother went to engineering school, so I was going to go to engineering school. And all my friends, I was encouraged to have friends in the brainier set. I did, in high school I did things like I was a prom chairman, I was a yearbook editor, I was in the marching band, but I just felt like achieving and meeting those expectations was required, not an option. As
you? Yeah,
much from unspoken and sometimes spoken parental pressure, but also it just became so ingrained so early. But then,
right.
my life took a detour.
Absolutely. And as you're talking, so much of this, resonates with me. My parents were both in education. And when it came time to go to college, it wasn't, do you want to go? It was, which one are you going to? And working on those. Now, what I often find is that, with everything, there's a good side and a bad side. So being the good girl, I would imagine afforded you some good things. Some good things came out of it, such as achieving things, accolades. What were some of the things that you feel, were a benefit of showing up and being the good girl?
So I certainly knew how to learn. And I I still to this day, believe it or not, use some of the skills I learned in high school. As I said, I was a yearbook editor. So I did layout design, which has actually come in very handy for social media, laying out
Mhm.
posts, designing posts. The fact that I actually started studying programming when I was 12. My parent, my brother and my mother taught me even before I got to high school. My brother took me to high school one day when I was in 7th grade to go with him because he's 5 years older than me. When I got to high school, I was the only girl and the only freshman in the computer classes. I still remember the first program I ever wrote was a blackjack program on an Apple II,
I
not even a
remember
2
that
plus.
Apple
Yes.
II.
I drew the little
My
yeah, so I grew up not afraid of technology, which was a huge benefit to me to this day. And also my mother in her own way wanted to bring me up sort of in a gender neutral. I mean, I was definitely a girl, but my father was in construction and real estate. My brother had tools, I had tools. So from the
Mhm.
time of 5, I had a hard hat. So I did all these things, which, I have no problem. I can build an IKEA bookcase, Clara, in 10 minutes. I don't have to look at the instructions, right? I have,
Mhm.
I think my fiance loves the fact because he's into woodworking that I have not quite as many tools as he does, but more than any other girl he's ever met. And I know how to use them. So
Wow.
those things were really a benefit. I had a core group of friends. Was I the most social person? No. Was I an extrovert? As we can tell, I am. Yes, I was still an extrovert, but I wasn't like the party girl. And maybe there was a little part of me that wish I had done a little more of the going to the parties, learning how to use makeup in high school.
Right, definitely. So now, what do you think being the good girl and showing up and always doing the right things, other than not learning about more things about makeup, what were you think maybe some of the other shortcomings, some of the things that maybe it held you back from doing by always doing the right things?
So I think it would have held me back more if my life hadn't changed right after high school. So I had a life altering illness as my graduation present from high school. I got cancer when I was 17, and it changed everything. I lost a year. You know, my mother said, well, good. You were a year ahead. Could afford to give the year back.
Mhm,
Uh, my mom always managed to find ways to say things like that. So it really did change my life very dramatically right after high school because the type of cancer I had, children were no longer an option for me. So
mhm,
it it made getting married less of a priority because I was never going to have children. And it changed how I looked at things. Initially, it didn't. Initially, it was, I'm still going to do all those things that I was supposed to. So I was determined to go to the same engineering school, even though between, the chemotherapy drugs and the anti-nausea drugs and all the drugs they give you, I was fuzzy for several years. Now we know, brain fog is a thing.
mhm,
But I was determined to go. I started down the computer track. So I was trying to keep it up, in part
mhm,
because I wanted to have a continued sense of normalcy in my life, but also because I'm a little bit stubborn and competitive with myself.
mhm.
So I wasn't going to let that stop me.
Right.
But it did change me because then I realized that my life was no longer on a traditional societal normal path.
Mhm.
And it started to give me freedom a little bit to
Yeah.
think a little differently
That's what I was
about.
wondering. Did it give you a certain sense of freedom where now you could forge forward and do the things that really mattered to you rather than, is this going to get me approval from someone else?
It did and it didn't.
Okay.
It, in some ways, it, well, I had a little fun in college, even if it was an engineering school. It was an engineering school, 85% men. I had never had a drink until I got to college. In fact, I was the girl that when I went to a friend's party in high school, I called my parents horrified that people were drinking beer and I like went and sat on the curb and wait for them to come pick me up. At RPI, uh, drinking was an art. There were many fraternities, open parties. This is in the 80s. Colleges weren't dry. So
Mhm.
I learned drinking, but I would never drink and drive ever. So I was the person who would always be the sober driver because people knew if I drove, I would not drink and everyone would get home. I didn't really want to go through chemotherapy when I got cancer because it only had a 5% chance of working. And I'm like, well, if I'm going to be miserable and die, why do I have to be miserable? I'm just going to die. But I struck a deal with my parents. They bribed me with a Camaro because I love cars. I love cars. So I had this beautiful white Camaro, and you can get 8 people in a Camaro.
You
Yes, you
can.
can. You
Mhm.
can. I love to dance. I danced like ever since I was a kid. I did ballet and modern and jazz and, nightclub dancing. And there were some great clubs in Albany. I went to Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, which is in Troy, New York, tiny, tiny post industrial town, but near Albany, which had some good places to go dancing. So I discovered that, yes, you could get 8 people in a Camaro. I was the only comfortable one. And it probably explains why I cracked the transmission pan 3 times because bottoming out with 8 people in the car,
Mhm.
that was one of those I could have a little fun. But for a while, I tried to stay on the path,
Mhm.
but I had more trouble with math after chemo, which they now know is related. Didn't affect my logic or language skills, just math, just math. So I took some business classes, discovered I loved it. It led to the change in careers, right? I
Mhm.
was determined to be a programmer, even worked for GE and MCI as a programmer, but I didn't love it. Had some business classes, which led me to have some law classes. I was never the person who was born to be a lawyer, or at least I didn't think I was. I never thought I would be a lawyer. But I realized I didn't want to be a programmer. The law class had made sense. So I went to the law professor from college and I said, I'm thinking of going to law school. Would you write me a reference? And to this day, I remember her reaction. And she said, oh, absolutely. I always knew you were going to be a lawyer. You were just fighting it. I'm like, okay, I guess I'll go to law
Mhm.
school.
Interesting.
So yeah, but it's great because what I do now is it's the blend of everything I've ever studied: business,
Mhm.
law, technology. I
Right.
really joke that I really am the blend of my parents. My mom was the programmer. My dad did deals. So I got the
Mhm.
schmoozing from my dad and the techie from my mom. And, Mendel would be proud, right? I'm in
I love that. And, when we're talking about the whole point of the show is talking about, defining success on our terms. You've had, several of these defining moments
I have.
where you were on a traditional path or whatever the path was you did. First it was with the cancer, then it was with, the not being able to, process the math in the same way. And even with law,
Yes.
you didn't just go and do things the corporate way, you brought it in. And I think it's such a beautiful illustration of how we sometimes have to lean in to the evolution,
Yes.
because even though we might have a picture of where it's going to go, is you, even though it might have felt uncomfortable, is you still didn't necessarily fight the change and the evolution. You might have a little bit. You really allowed it to create a new path for you.
I think what I fight is to always keep moving forward. I mean,
Mm.
my fight drives me forward. I am in the fight or flight instinct. My instinct really is fight, not flight, which is good in pursuing life, bad if anyone ever tried to rob me, because I might actually have the fight instinct and not the flight
Mhm.
instinct, which is, I know that what you're supposed to do if somebody wants to rob you, take your wallet, throw it in the opposite direction, and run.
Right.
Uh, and I know that, but I'm afraid I might not.
Yeah.
But I digress. So no, I do keep trying to drive forward. And there are times when certainly the change is scary as heck,
Mhm.
because when I started my own practice, you're leaping without a net. It's, will clients follow? Will you get
Right.
new clients? Will you succeed? What's your new definition of success? Well, going from an employee to an employer, even if your employees are just contractors, it's a huge difference.
It is. Yeah.
It's a
So
huge difference.
how do you suggest, not just for yourself, but there's so many women that are going to be watching this that are on the cusp of knowing it's time for a change. And like you said, sometimes you have to leap and you have no idea where the net is going to come. So, what are some strategies that you would give some women who are wanting to maybe start the process to leap and have that faith, and I don't want to say eliminate, but try to quiet the fear a little bit?
So the first thing I would say is the fear doesn't actually ever go away. I mean, you're successful too. And there's always the, will it keep going? Will it keep working? So you have to first get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You have to acknowledge that there will be moments when you go, why did I do this? But at the end of the day, what you have to remember is, especially if you're leaping from employee to your own boss, is you have so much more freedom and control as
Mhm.
your own boss. So if you are willing to keep putting one foot in front of the other, one foot in front of the other, take the next step, you will move down the path that you're meant to move on in the right way. Another thing is, if you're thinking of making that leap to starting your own business, make sure that you've got your finances lined up first. Take out an extra credit card while you're still an employee,
Mhm.
because you might have a hit to your credit rating when you start up your own business, or your income might drop initially. Consider whether you want to start your business as a side hustle. I mean,
Mm.
we are so busy as women because we are often sandwiched between parents who need help, children who need help, our job, our spouses. It's a lot that, And I don't care that men may be doing more. The reality is we're doing most of it when it comes to that part of life, right? The family, the interactions. And
Mhm.
it's also the mental load that we carry. We're the ones who have the walking calendars are in our heads. We
Mhm.
know who has to be here, when, where, what you have to do. I mean, I gave up. I now have a giant whiteboard in my hallway, and as I think of things, I just write it down as I walk by. I'm serious. I have one of those really big whiteboards on wheels, and I decided the best place to put it is in the hallway outside my office so I can walk as I walk by. If I just think of something, I just write it down and I don't have to worry about will I forget.
Mhm.
I also have a pad and pen by my bed so
Mhm.
that I don't have to turn on my phone in the middle of the night. Because if you turn on the phone in the middle of the night, you're sunk. So if I
Mhm.
wake up with that aha idea, I can write it down manually by pen and paper. And my handwriting in the morning really looks really funny when I look at it, but it's usually neat enough that I can figure out what I meant. I actually
Mhm.
started that when I was a programmer because very often as you fall asleep, and your brain starts to relax, it actually will start to pull together things from different angles. And you often have that aha moment as you're falling asleep. It's kind of like learning a language, learning it, studying a little bit right before bed actually helps it stay in your brain a little better.
Yeah, I love that.
So get used to being uncomfortable.
Mhm.
Maybe consider starting it as a side hustle first, just to get your feet wet to feel that this is the right path. Line up your extra finances if you can in advance, whether it's a line of credit or a credit card that you can rely on. And also plan before you leap.
Mhm.
Figure out, what your services are going to be. Check the name you want to pick before you commit to that name because somebody might have already picked your business name.
Mhm.
Definitely set up when you're at the point you're leaping, set up an LLC. You must separate you as a person from you as a business so that if the business ever has problems, your personal assets don't get in trouble. You can file an LLC in almost every state for under $300. It's an online one or two screen form. You do
Right.
not need a lawyer to file for your LLC. Maybe to help you with some of the more advanced steps, but to start it, you don't.
I
Get
love
a
that.
business bank account, get a business credit card. Those are the things that will help protect you. And, write out a business plan. Even if it's simple, I want to do this, I want to do this. And the other thing I would say, because I did not do this, is when you venture into the world of social media, start small. Start with
Mhm.
one or two platforms, not all of them.
Exactly.
She
Yes, I think
said, having not done that. Yes. I'm like,
oh, exactly. But I think so many times again we get so excited and
yes.
we think we need to do it all at one time and we forget the journey. Another thing I want to ask you about is sort of the yin and the yang of life and business. What you are doing is what a lot of people would consider to be very left brain, very scientific, very logical. But, being that I love to talk about work life harmony, we also have to feed that life side, that humanity side. And you've done this too. So to help you balance out what you do on the professional side, you've done some non-traditional things on the personal side. So tell us a little bit about what you do to help you find that harmony and get yourself connected.
So my passion, and it's more than a hobby, is I'm a competitive ballroom dancer.
Mm.
I'm an amateur. I have a professional partner. I started swing dancing and ballroom dancing in the 90s and competed through the early 2000s. And then I stopped for 10 years because first my father and then my mother both got sick and then passed away from cancer. And I was the only local child. And this falls back into the good girl. It was very damaging to my mental health to be the primary caretaker to my parents. My mother, as brilliant as she was, also had a bit of a narcissism problem. My brother left home at 18, never came back, went to college away, Massachusetts, never came back because it just, that was the dynamic at home. It was not easy being our parents' children. But I love my parents and they got me through being cancer. So I felt that I owed it to my mother to help her get through it 4 times in 3 years to the point where My health was going down the drain because of it. I ended up in the hospital twice in her last year of life. I got sepsis from a pneumonia vaccine because my immune system was so overloaded that
Mhm.
it saw a vaccine and it just went haywire. People who knew me for a very long time were saying, you need to be able to let some of it go. And I just couldn't, in part because of the good girl. I could not help my mother, even
Mhm.
if it was costing me everything. Um, After she passed, I was then the executor of her estate. I'm a lawyer. I could do it. I talked to people I knew who were state lawyers. I got the advice. I did it. And about a year later, I said, I have to get back. So I did not dance from 2005 to 2015. I used to dance 5 nights a week. Maybe I danced once a year for 10 years. It was traumatic for me. I went back to dancing. I found an amazing coach and partner. For the first year or two, I only danced maybe once a week with him or maybe twice a week. But it was just to get back to having some sense of something for me, the thing that makes my heart sing. I love it. And
Mhm.
in 2017, because as I mentioned, I am competitive with myself, I said, it might be fun to compete again. So I asked my partner, and we sort of had a first competition as a test. He didn't say it was a test, but it really was a test. We were only dancing maybe 3 hours a week before then. I evidently passed the test because starting a week after the competition, when I could walk again, uh, he started training me 15 hours a week, like a Russian. And admittedly, for 2 years, I was a ballroom dancer more than I was a lawyer. So
Mhm.
after being a lawyer at this point for almost 25 years, for being the good girl, for still feeling determined that I had to have this good, high powered kind of career it stays with you. You never quite get over being the good girl. I put myself first. At that point, I knew my marriage was already over. It just took several more years for it to officially be over. And I just did this thing. It was extraordinary. It was a moment in time. I was healthy. I had an amazing partner. I used some money from savings. I'm like, I need to do this for me. I still was a lawyer, but maybe a few hours a day. But six
Mhm.
days a week, 4 to 6 hours a day, I danced or worked out and basically became a semi-professional ballroom dancer. It was great. We even made it to nationals. It was awesome.
Oh.
But that was my non-traditional thing. So I then of course the pandemic hit. And before the pandemic hit, everyone said to me, but why are you spending all this time and money? I'm like, you never know. I mean, I already knew you never know how much time you have because I
True.
had stage 4 cancer at 17. You never know. And I always lived in fear that I would get cancer again because the stats show that if you had it really bad with high chemo young, the odds are you probably will of some kind. Maybe not the same, but something because the chemo is just damaging. So for 2.5 years, I lived my dream. When I was a kid, my secret dream was to own a dance studio or to be a dancer on Broadway. I love dancing. And then the pandemic hit. So I built a dance studio into my basement. So I,
Of
my
course
part,
you
of
did.
course I did. So my partner, and because he's a pro and we're in different age brackets, he has at that time, 3 people he competed with. We bubbled. We didn't see anybody outside of the 4 of us. And we would practice at home in my house every day. I mirrored the walls. I had the photos of like all of 4 of us on the walls. I put the dance studio in. It was, in its own way, heaven. It made the pandemic possible. But then all of a sudden, everybody understood you never know how much time you have because the whole world changed. We thought
Mhm.
it would be 30 days or a couple months. It's been 3 years, right?
Yeah.
Fortunately, now there are vaccines. And then, I was unfortunately right. I got cancer a second time, but this time only stage 1. So I didn't really dance much or compete last year, but I did get engaged.
Yeah.
And yeah, I did get engaged and he is learning to dance for me because he said when you dance you smile and I like when you smile. So he's learning to dance. And my dance partner is excitedly going to choreograph a simple first wedding dance for us.
Ah,
I do not
that's
expect him to compete or get that level. Just If we're on a cruise or at
Yes.
somebody else's wedding and there's music
Mhm.
playing, we can dance together. It'll be great.
I
I'm
love
I'm thrilled.
I
So
love
we're
yeah,
getting back to I'm getting back to dancing after having to take a year off. But yeah.
so good. So I want to back up for a moment because you brought up something that I think many of the people that are going to be watching the show are facing, and that is our parents getting older
Mhm.
and having to take care of our parents. And you brought up the concept that you really felt it falls on your shoulders because again, they helped you when you were ill and that was never a question for you to show up. So many of us are having elderly parents. And, I'm in a position where, my father has dementia. My mother's doing a lot of the caregiving. I live in a different state, so I can't be the good girl that I was raised to be. But my sisters are really taking on that responsibility. And I think, you hit on something where many times we feel the obligation, but at what cost? Because you were so open and honest to saying that it really caused you to put yourself last. What, and I don't know if you have the answer to this, but if you could replay time, what are some suggestions that you would have for some of us going through this that we can still be there and be the good girl to take care of our parents, but how do we do it without costing ourselves?
So I think the first thing is, and I knew the rule, but I just couldn't live the rule, which is the number one rule of being a caretaker is you have to take care of yourself first. And in part because of my mother's narcissism, in part because I was the only child. It's only me and my brother.
Mhm.
My mom was an only child. N- my brother was in Boston. It really was me. And my mother had the money to hire help, but she still wanted me. Um, to the sometimes expense of my job. At that time, I was still an employee. I didn't have my own practice yet. Although I did make the mistake of starting my practice, my own business, the last year of my mother's life, because at that point when I started it, she was in remission and then she wasn't. So I ended up
Mm.
really not working for the first year of starting a business, which is not something I would recommend. It, it's slightly expensive to live on savings, but the first thing is you have to get comfortable as a caretaker setting boundaries.
Mm.
It may be difficult, but you have to be honest with yourself that you cannot do it all. That unless you happen to be a medical professional, we aren't medical professionals, we're children, or we
Mm.
might be parents to a child. But when it comes to our parents, we're not doctors, we're not God. And doctors aren't God, by the way, they aren't always right. But you have to set the boundaries. You have to put yourself first. You have to get enough sleep. The second thing you have to do is always have healthy snacks with you.
Mm.
Always. If you are going just to your parents' house or if you're taking them to doctor's appointments, everything always takes longer and runs late. And if you do not have healthy snacks with you, you will eat whatever's there. And it's never healthy. You would think that you will lose weight. You might if you're a person who stops eating in stress, but more likely you're just going to eat bad things because you're exhausted, you haven't slept enough, and sugar helps.
Right.
I gained like 25 pounds the last 3 years of my mother's life. Thank God for dancing, I lost it. But it wrecks your health. So now I always tell people have a little cooler bag, one of those little insulated bags, or at least have some bars. Get bars that are higher protein. And literally to this day, no matter what I'm doing, if you open my purse or my backpack or my dance bag, no matter where I'm going, there's at least one protein bar.
Love that. Love that.
Always.
So let's back
Like,
up to the boundaries though. How do you communicate these? Because, so many people, they don't know how to communicate to their parents to say, I can't do this because they retroactively go back to being a kid and they don't want to have that defiance. They might be facing some guilt. Their parents may or may not have the finances to bring somebody else. So, what would be some ways to set these expectations in a kind way, but also to make sure that your parents hear you?
so that is really difficult. It is not easy. The first thing is you have to be first honest with yourself with what your other commitments and responsibilities are. Are you working full time? Are you at a job where you could temporarily go part time without impact on your job? And the key is you have to know what this is about, knowing your rights. You always
Mhm.
need to know what your company's family medical leave policy is. Can you use it? Can you use it for a part time instead of taking off 12 weeks? Can you take 3 days a week? Or can you take 2 days a week or 3 half days and have it count toward Family and Medical Leave Act? Because under FMLA, they're supposed to guarantee you your job back. It's not allowed under the law. Granted, sometimes the law isn't always followed, but
Sure.
it can protect you if you're working and you need to keep working, but you still need to do these things. It is having a schedule. A calendar of some form will be your best friend. And I strongly suggest it is in your phone. In
Mm.
my phone, I have my law calendar, my dance calendar, my personal calendar, my vacation calendar, all synced to each other so I can see everything all the time. And if you are being a caretaker, that will help you. You must become organized when it comes to time and your schedule. So I'm a big fan of a consolidated calendar for yourself.
Definitely.
And when people say to you, "How are you doing? Can I help?" Don't say no. Assume that if somebody has asked you if they can help or what they can do to help, assume they mean it
Mhm.
because you will need help, especially if it's a serious illness for your parents. Assume they will actually genuinely mean that offer and
Mhm.
figure out what other people can do. Maybe it's they can do food shopping for you 1 day a week to get something
Mhm.
off your plate. Maybe they can drop some meals off. Maybe they can visit the family member once a week just for a couple hours for you.
Right.
If the resources aren't there to hire people, if you've got friends who offer, accept. If there are relatives in other cities, ask, can someone come for a week at a time?
Love that.
And again, make a schedule.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to be the coordinator, and likely it's the local child. It's likely going to be the good girl. But just because you're organizing the schedule doesn't mean you have to do it all.
I
And
love that. 3 very powerful tips. Again, being very honest about what you can give. Love, love, love the schedule. For anybody that, talks with me, they know that is everything when it comes to, again, being able to show up. And I love the idea of, again, ask for help and take people up on it, even if it's the small things. And I love that, reaching out and saying, can you come out for a day? That was something that my mom really struggled on. And I would say in the last year, she's really opened up to allowing us, to come in, even if it's just giving her time to go for a walk. But you have to be truly honest about what you can and can't give.
and it's also going to be honest if you're married and have kids with your spouse and your
Hmm.
kids and say, okay, for the next or while this is going on, and you may not know the duration, I things have to change at home.
Hmm.
If your spouse doesn't understand, that's a whole other discussion,
Yes.
but your spouse is going to need to step up or your fiance or your live-in. And if your kids are old enough, they need to step up. If
Hmm.
if your kids are over the age of 12 and you're doing the laundry and taking care of a parent, it's time they did their own laundry. It just
I,
is.
I
Right?
agree. Well, again, it takes that community, and
It
we have
takes a
to.
village.
It really
It
does.
really takes a village. And I will tell you that even with help, it is still hard.
Hmm.
I have an extraordinary group of friends who are for me like substitute family to the point where one of my closest friends, when my mom was in hospice at the end, literally went every single day after work. She went every day the last 2 weeks of my mother's life just so I could take a little bit of a break and leave for a few hours. But so my mother would have somebody there.
Right.
And in fact, she held one of my mother's hands while I held the other at the end.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I had other friends who pitched in as much as they could, whether it was getting me out of the house or out of a hospital for a few
Mhm.
hours. And I felt incredibly lucky. I have just one brother. I don't have a big family. Like I said, my
Mhm.
mother was an only child. Her father had no siblings that had kids. They were killed in World War II. So I did have a very small family circle, but I had an extraordinary group of friends. And I had to rely on them. I had to lean on them. And to this day, it was defining. When your parent gets ill or a child gets ill, you will find out very quickly who
Mhm.
really are your friends.
Very true. So true. Sharon, this has just been so powerful. I have two more questions that I want to ask you before we start wrapping them up. One of them is about where you are now and what you are working on. I love with your business how you're bringing in sort of the health, the life, the business, the harmony, and everything. So, what is something that you are working on right now that we need to let people know about?
So, one of the things that I find with women in general, there are always exceptions, is we tend to be nice. We tend to not ask for what we really deserve, whether it's a promotion or pay. And studies actually bear this out. It's been shown that men will apply for a job or a promotion if they're somewhere around 50 to 60% qualified. Women typically wait till they're 90% qualified.
Mm.
So one of the things I developed actually is a sort of hands-on workbook for women. It's designed for women who have their own business, particularly services of some kind, professional consulting, web, whatever, marketing, to make sure you know what you actually own and what you bring to the table so you can one protect it, but also use it to make sure you're getting paid what you're worth. So it's a hands-on workbook. I call it Securing Your Brilliance, a hands-on workbook to knowing your copyrights and your intellectual property. It helps you work through all of the tools that you use when you perform services for others over and over, but you
Right.
probably aren't charging for. And it helps you find
Mhm.
them all and then figure out, well, okay, if you had to create this from scratch for each client, what would you actually charge? Most people undercharge. Raise your rates. It's the
Ah,
fastest way to get a raise. So it helps you catalog everything, find everything, track all your passwords, track all your accounts. It's literally like a workbook and logbook combined. So you know how to protect your copyrights, how to protect your confidential information. And I want it to be accessible. It's less than 20 bucks. It's like
oh
less
my
than a
God.
trip to Starbucks. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and we're going to put all of your information in the show notes because I know so many people, including myself, that need that workbook. So we've got to get that out. And, before I ask you the last question, I just want to say how grateful I am that we were connected and that you came on the show. When we talked that first time, I just knew you were going to be such a perfect fit for sharing this message of defining life on our terms. You have so much positivity, you have so much bravery, and I know that that didn't come overnight for you. And I really just want to acknowledge what you're doing for professional women, and again giving us the ability to have more confidence in sharing our voices, but also really having the tools to protect ourselves and to do that in a way that everybody can achieve. That it's not just reserved for the super
Mm,
wealthy or for the super achievers. It's out there for the average woman. And that's something very special. So thank you
thanks.
for using your story, your path to be able to secure a future for all of us.
And
So
thank you
thank
very much for having me on. As you can tell, I'm pretty much an open book. I'll make
you.
sure that you have links if people want to reach out to me and ask
Absolutely.
questions. I'm happy to.
I love it. So, with our last question, we started off with how did you think success was going to look for you as a kid? Now, what I want to ask you is where you are today. How do you define success for yourself today?
So today, I would not like to still be a lawyer when I'm 80. Probably
Mhm.
not. I might still be a coach because I really enjoy mentoring women. For me, success is getting enough sleep,
Yes.
getting enough sleep, getting enough time to dance. Right now, I'm only dancing 2 or 3 times a week. I'd like to be able to do it a little more, but it's finding balance. 6 to 7 days a week was too much. 2 days a week is a little too little. I'll find that balance. And, if you won the lottery, what would you do? I would want to be able to take, 5 or 10 friends a year on a vacation
Yeah.
because it's so much more fun to travel together and I love to travel. So I want to be able to find that balance between work, travel, dancing. At the same point, I'm in my 50s, so I do have to be fiscally responsible. But I also have learned that I can do my job anywhere, have a laptop, will travel.
Absolutely. I love
And
that.
love. Love is very
There we go.
well, no,
Exactly.
and I'm getting married. So no, I have like the greatest fiance, and I, as you can tell, I grin when I talk about him. So you're never too old to find love. So this is my second, this will
Mhm.
be my second marriage. And he is the love of my life. He makes me laugh more than anyone ever has ever. It took both of us to our 50s to find it, but it's never too late. You're never too old and it's never too late.
I love that. And I think that message is a perfect place for us to go ahead and sign out. So, again, Sharon, thank you so much for being here. And for all of you that are watching, it is never too late. You get to live your life and define success all on your terms. So, we talked about the beauty and the challenges of being the good girl. We talked about really tapping in and finding that harmony between your work and your life. And we talked about the importance of protecting our success all along the way. So, thank you for joining us. We will always be bringing you more messages to inspire, support, and encourage you to go after your truth and your success. Please make sure that you like, you share, and you follow the show so we can continue to share all these messages of beauty and impact. I'm Clara Capano, your host, and we'll see you next time.